Hello there, and welcome. Tonight, we'll descend into a mystery older than timekeeping, older than pyramids, or painting older, perhaps, than memory itself. There are whispers, scattered across stone and sand, hidden in patterns, myths, and impossible alignments. What if a great civilization walked this world long before what we call history began? What if they left us messages not in language, but in architecture, energy, geometry, and silence? Tonight, we'll explore 100 strange, fascinating ideas that suggest humanity is not the first to rise, just the first to forget. And while you're settling in, before your eyes grow too heavy, I'd love it if you gently tapped subscribe or pressed the little hype button YouTube recently added. It's a small click, but it helps keep these experiments and explorations orbiting out into the algorithm. You can also leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the night. It's oddly fascinating to see where people are drifting off with us, scattered across the world like stars across the galaxy. Now, take a deep breath, let your day drift away, and let's travel together into the quiet corners of the universe. Long before we built skyscrapers or wrote laws, long before the pharaohs etched their names in stone or the Sumerians marked clay with wedges, something may have stirred on this planet. Something older than our oldest stories, quieter than bones, and patient beyond time. We are taught that civilization began around 5,000 years ago, that before that, we were scattered, simple, and silent. But what if that beginning was only a reboot? What if we are not the first? What if history is deeper than we dare imagine? In the layers beneath our feet, the earth keeps secrets, not in the smooth timelines we draw in textbooks, but in the messier language of stone and sediment, of impossible things in impossible places. In 1979, deep in the Paluxy riverbed of Texas, alongside dinosaur footprints that had hardened into limestone, there appeared something strange, a track resembling a human foot, arched, proportioned, deliberate. It sparked fierce debate. Was it misinterpreted erosion? Was it carved as a hoax? Or, more troublingly, was it real? If it was real, it couldn't be explained. The rock was over 100 million years old. Far from Texas, in a cave in South Africa, miners unearthed a set of grooved metal spheres perfectly rounded, with deep ridges that encircled them like planetary rings. One, housed in the Museum of Klerksdorp, spins on its own axis when sealed in a display case. These spheres are embedded in pyrophyllite rock dated to 2.8 billion years old. The official explanation is that they're naturally formed mineral nodules. Yet their symmetry, balance, and inexplicable behavior leave behind a quiet discomfort. If they are artifacts, who shaped them? If not us, then who? And then there are the tools. Hammerheads encased in rock from the Ordovician period, a nail embedded in sandstone, an aluminum gear fragment found in coal. These anomalies, dismissed by most, catalogued quietly by a few, seem to whisper a message that doesn't fit. A message not of error, but of echo of something having walked, built, and shaped before us. If even one of these artifacts is genuine, the timeline collapses. The story shatters. We measure our world in epochs and eras, divide the past into tidy chapters, as if time were a clean staircase. But Earth is not clean. It is a palimpsest, written over again and again. The fossil record skips and jumps. Civilizations rise and fall in silence. Ash covers evidence. Flood waters erase architecture. Even the mountains forget. And yet, every now and then, something resurfaces, a ruin too advanced for its context, a tale passed down for thousands of years that somehow aligns with geology, a memory, perhaps, that refuses to die. Lake Vostok, buried beneath miles of Antarctic ice, is sealed like a time capsule. But under that ice are signs of heat and structure, magnetic anomalies, and geometric patterns that suggests something once existed there, long before the ice, before the current map of the world was even drawn. If civilization once lived in places now inhospitable, how would we ever know? Consider Tiahuanaco in Bolivia. At nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, it defies logic. The blocks are massive, precisely cut, interlocking. Some weigh over 100 tons and are scattered like a child's forgotten toy set, as though something once lifted and dropped them effortlessly. The mainstream date places its construction at around 400 AD, but the alignments of its monuments and the erosion on the stones hint at something much older, perhaps even pre-glacial. The builders are unknown, their language lost, their tools missing, and yet their work remains. We live in a house built on sand, and we pretend it's concrete. Archaeology is shaped by what we find, but more often by what we haven't yet, and absence is not evidence. For most of human existence, the sea levels were lower. Much of the ancient coastline, the place where any intelligent civilization would likely have flourished, is now underwater. Submerged cities off the coasts of India and Japan hint at forgotten chapters. The ruins at Dwarka, the patterns at Yonaguni, sit beneath the waves like sentences in a lost language. Their age is debated, their presence is not. It's easy to believe that we're the pinnacle, that we are the first to touch stars, the first to shape atoms, the first to look back on Earth from above. But the universe does not favor linear stories. It favors cycles, collapses, resets. The Cambrian explosion, the Permian extinction, the Younger Dryas. Life blooms, life burns, life begins again. In 1851, a small gold chain was found embedded in a lump of coal in Illinois. It was delicate, ornate, twisted, and broken. The coal was estimated to be over 300 million years old. The report appeared briefly in newspapers and vanished, like many such stories, too strange to accept, too dangerous to remember. These are not proofs. They are provocations. They are threads, frayed and tangled, leading nowhere or everywhere. And if we follow them, carefully, humbly, they begin to form a silhouette, not of Atlantis rising from the sea, not of space gods descending from stars, but of something human, something we used to be, or perhaps could become again. The illusion of the timeline is that it moves forward, that the past is below us and the future above. But maybe time spirals. Maybe we are not standing at the summit of progress, but at the outer edge of a wheel that has turned many times. Maybe somewhere, buried deep in the ground or frozen in forgotten memory, are the fingerprints of those who came before. Not myth, not fantasy, just a story, erased too well. In 1929, in the quiet archives of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, a curious map was found drawn on the skin of gazelle hide. It bore the name of its maker, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, and the date 1513. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary early Renaissance attempt to piece together the growing world. But the more cartographers and scholars examined it, the stranger it became. It showed South America's eastern coast with uncanny accuracy, far beyond what was thought possible at the time. It placed the northern edge of Antarctica ice-free and detailed centuries before the continent had even been officially discovered. The map, in a way, saw through the ice. Piri Reis didn't claim originality. His notes along the edges mention older sources, ancient charts collected and copied, passed down through unknown hands, possibly even from the time of Alexander the Great. He described them as sea maps drawn in the days of Iskender, full of precision and detail, far beyond what should have survived the chaos of time. And yet, here they were, stitched into his own creation, like a forgotten symphony replayed through new instruments. This wasn't the only anomaly. In 1531, Oronteus Phineas, a mathematician and cartographer from France, compiled a map that, once again, depicted the Antarctic coastline not as a lifeless expanse beneath kilometers of glacial ice, but as a mountainous, river-carved land, complete with bays, inlets, and navigable terrain. Modern geological surveys have since confirmed that much of what Phineas sketched matches what lies beneath Antarctica's ice sheet today. But this knowledge was only made available by radar imaging in the 20th century. The ice covering that continent is at least 6,000 years old in some places, possibly far older. So, how did they know? The standard answers do little to quell the unease. Coincidence, they say. Projection error. Mistaken identity. But the lines don't lie. The precision, the topography, the coastal features that vanish beneath modern ice. They suggest access to a source. A set of maps, ancient beyond record, accurate beyond reason. Across cultures and ages, maps were more than tools. They were memories. They were stories frozen in lines and borders, designed not just to guide travel but to preserve truth. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in South America, they were astonished to find native maps already showing parts of the coastline they hadn't yet explored. Some scholars point to maps carved into stone in India, others to petroglyphs in North America that seem to depict land masses in strange proportion but eerily accurate shape. And always, the same pattern. A suggestion of memory older than memory, of knowledge that survived cataclysm by clinging to the margins tucked into oral lore, hidden in monasteries, passed from ship captain to ship captain like a whispered secret, a silent cartographic legacy. There are those who believe that long before our version of history began, there was another chapter, a civilization advanced enough to chart coastlines, to sail great distances, to understand the curvature of the earth, not with satellites or GPS, but with observation, time, and a kind of knowledge we no longer teach. When that world collapsed by flood, fire, or time itself, its maps became the breadcrumbs, faint, scattered, and almost lost. Antarctica is the great outlier in this story. Its very presence on maps before the 19th century challenges everything. Mainstream history tells us it was not seen by human eyes until 1820, and yet, there it is outlined in detail, labeled Terra Australis, drawn not as a land of ice, but as one of mountains and rivers. A land remembered. The Piri-Reis map even includes longitude, an achievement thought impossible before the invention of accurate marine chronometers in the 18th century. For centuries, sailors struggled with longitudinal navigation, often ending up hundreds of miles off course. So how does a map from 1513 hint at such precision? Again, Rees cites older sources, charts that came from the ancient sea kings, a phrase that has no clear reference, no direct lineage, just the echo of something once known. Skeptics argue these features were guesswork, that ancient cartographers filled in blanks with artistic liberties. But guesswork doesn't usually match satellite data half a millennium later. It doesn't include river systems buried beneath ice. It doesn't accidentally mirror features uncovered by seismic imaging. What we are left with is not proof, but a quiet puzzle. An impression in the snow, long faded but still visible. A signal beneath the static. Maps are not just about place, they are about perspective. To draw a world is to claim understanding of it. Whoever first charted these coastlines not only saw a world very different from ours, but possibly lived in it. They stood on shores now swallowed by ice. They traced rivers now locked in silence. And for reasons we can only guess at, they recorded it carefully, beautifully, and in ways that somehow endured. We like to believe that the past is behind us, but sometimes it leaks forward in ink and skin and stone. Sometimes it refuses to be forgotten. The lost maps whisper not of fantasy, but of memory. A memory we do not own, but one that seems to recognize us just the same. On a quiet hill in southeastern Turkey, beneath layers of dust and time, something once stood that should not exist. It lay hidden for thousands of years, not buried by accident, but deliberately entombed, as though those who built it wished to seal it off from memory. When Göbekli Tepe was first uncovered in the 1990 seconds, it began rewriting everything we thought we knew about the origins of civilization. Massive stone pillars, carved with animals, symbols, and strange abstract forms, arranged in perfect circles, some weighing over 10 tons. And all of it, every stone, every carving built over 11,000 years ago, more than 6,000 years before the pyramids, before Stonehenge, before cities, before written language, before the wheel. This was not a simple shrine or scattered arrangement of stones. It was monumental architecture, carefully designed and executed with astonishing skill. The pillars are arranged in nested enclosures, with central monoliths flanked by others in a symmetrical design. The carvings show creatures both familiar and extinct: foxes, snakes, boars, vultures, lions. Some stand still, some fight, some appear to guard. But it's not just art, it's story. It's language in a form we've not yet learned to read. The conventional story of civilization is built on a neat sequence. First, people formed settlements. Then they grew crops. Then came surplus. Then temples. Then trade. Then writing. Then culture. But Göbekli Tepe breaks that sequence completely. It was built by hunter-gatherers. There is no sign of agriculture when the site was active. And yet, they moved massive stones, sculpted them with precision, and aligned their structures with stars. It suggests something unthinkable, that organized religion, or at least ritual gathering, may have come before farming. That myth and meaning may have seeded civilization, not the other way around. And then they buried it. Not abandoned it to time, not left it to erode, but covered it purposefully, preserving it like a message sealed in a bottle and tossed into the ocean of history. This act is what saved it. Without the burial, erosion would have worn it down to nothing. But now it stands again, half revealed, like a memory returning slowly from a long sleep. The age alone is staggering. Carbon dating puts the oldest layers at around 9,600 BCE, just after the end of the last ice age. At that time, the Earth was still trembling from the Younger Dryas, a period of rapid climate change that reshaped continents and coastlines. Sea levels were rising, megafauna were vanishing, glaciers were retreating. It was an age of upheaval, and yet, amid the chaos, someone carved a sanctuary of stone. There are no signs of permanent dwellings at the site. No houses, no hearths, no evidence that people lived there day to day. It was a place of gathering, perhaps of worship, perhaps of ritual. Some theorize that it was a kind of cathedral for a nomadic world, a shared spiritual anchor built by many groups over time. Others think it may have encoded astronomical knowledge, marking solstices or celestial events. The central pillars, T-shaped and towering, bear humanoid features: hands, belts, loincloths, suggesting they represent beings, not just stones. But who they were meant to depict is unknown. If Göbekli Tepe had been discovered just a century earlier, it might have been dismissed as a hoax, a construct too advanced for its time, too sophisticated for the supposedly primitive people who built it. But it is real, and it forces us to imagine a humanity more capable, more symbolic, more united in purpose than we once believed possible at that stage of development. What else was lost? What other sacred hills lie hidden under farmland or forest, not by accident but by design? The builders of Göbekli Tepe did not just shape stone. They shaped mystery. And mystery, unlike ruins, does not erode. Some believe Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning, but the echo of something even older. A reconstruction, perhaps, of a story remembered through disaster. A resetting of knowledge passed down through oral tradition or sacred geometry. The carvings are not random. They repeat across different enclosures. They feature patterns, combinations, and mythic symbols that appear to reference ideas rather than mere decoration. Some researchers have attempted to decode them as constellations, others as myth cycles or warnings. One pillar in particular, the so-called vulture stone, has drawn attention for what some interpret as an astronomical chart marking a cataclysm, possibly a comet strike or cosmic event that altered the world. If that's true, then Göbekli Tepe may not be the first temple. It may be a tombstone for an earlier world. There is something haunting in that idea that this place, so ancient and quiet now, was once a beacon in a dark time, a gathering point for scattered survivors, a place where story and meaning were used to knit people together again after a global trauma. And perhaps they knew, even then, that memory alone would not last. So they carved it in stone and buried it deep. We walk the surface of the earth as though its history is visible. But sites like this remind us that the surface lies, that the ground beneath our feet holds versions of humanity we've never met. We think of civilization as a linear ascent, clay tablets to smartphones, fire to fusion. But Göbekli Tepe tells a different tale, one where knowledge can rise, fall, and rise again. One where the greatest truths may be written in languages we no longer speak, stored not in books or code, but in the silent weight of carved stone. The story of civilization may not be a ladder, it may be a spiral, and somewhere, hidden in the dust and the bedrock, are the fingerprints of those who turned the wheel before us. Long before there were maps, before history etched names into stone, there were stories. They moved like wind through generations, told by firelight, carried in song, etched in memory. And at the heart of so many of them, across languages and landscapes, is a single shared story. A flood, a great deluge that rose without mercy, drowning cities, swallowing valleys, cleansing the world in a tide that spared almost nothing. It appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Bible, in the myths of the Hopi, the Yoruba, the Sumerians, the Hindus, the Norse, the Aztecs, the Aboriginal Australians. In each version, the details shift, the names, the vessels, the warnings, but the shape of the tale stays the same. Water came, and the world was washed away. For a long time, these flood stories were viewed as metaphor, allegory, a way to explain suffering, to moralize about rebirth or divine wrath. But what if they weren't stories at all? What if they were memories fragmented and passed down, distorted by time, but rooted in something real? At the end of the last ice age, around 12,800 years ago, Earth underwent a dramatic shift. Temperatures plummeted again in an event known as the Younger Dryas. Then, just as suddenly, the cold ended. The glaciers melted at an astonishing rate. Sea levels surged. In some areas, they rose as much as 400 feet. Vast tracts of land disappeared beneath the ocean. Coastal plains became seafloors. Entire ecosystems vanished. And if a civilization had once lived along those coasts, as ours does now, its cities would have been swallowed, its records drowned, its people scattered or lost. Scientists have debated the cause of this sudden upheaval. One theory, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, suggests a comet or fragments of one struck the Earth, igniting massive fires, sending ash into the atmosphere, disrupting climate, and triggering the flooding that followed. While controversial, the idea has gained traction as more evidence emerges. Layers of microscopic spherules, melt glass, and soot found across North America and Europe, all pointing to a high-temperature event consistent with an impact. Whatever the cause, the effects were undeniable. The world changed in the span of a few human lifetimes. Glacial lakes burst and surged across continents. The Black Sea may have been a freshwater basin before it was flooded with salt water through the Bosporus. massive waterfalls carved through bedrock, inland seas formed and retreated, shorelines shifted hundreds of miles, and through it all, humans survived watching the water rise, watching their world dissolve. And they remembered. There is a strange kind of resonance when flood myths are mapped globally. The Muisca people of Colombia speak of a time when the earth was dark and waters rose to consume all but a few. The Chinese legend of Gunyu tells of relentless floods that reshape the land, requiring divine intervention to tame. In the Deucalion myth of Greece, the gods flood the world, and only two survive by building an ark. In India's ancient texts, Manu is warned by a fish about a coming flood and builds a boat that saves life from destruction. Even the Norse speak of a great wave, of a serpent that churns the sea until the gods themselves drown. These stories were not shared by trade. They rose independently, in isolation, and yet they echo one another like distant voices calling through time. The coincidences stack too neatly. The memory feels too stubborn. If there was once a civilization before ours, or even a network of societies scattered across early coastlines, the flood would have been their end. Whatever they built, whatever they knew, would have been lost beneath the waves. And the survivors, scattered inland and traumatized, would have carried not blueprints, but stories. They would speak of the world that was, of the ocean that came, of the gods or stars that warned them. And over time, those stories would become the flood myths we know today. There are hints, scattered like driftwood, submerged structures off the coasts of India and Japan, patterns of megaliths inland that suggest migration from lost shorelines, evidence of population bottlenecks in genetic data, as though vast numbers of people were once reduced to a small remnant. Even the biblical ark may echo an older truth, not of 2x2 animals, but of people clutching survival on hastily built rafts, clinging to each other in a world dissolving. We tend to think of the past as static, fixed in stone, slow to change. But the end of the Ice Age was a time of violence. The earth shook, the skies darkened, and the seas rose. What took generations to build could vanish overnight. In such moments, history doesn't fade, it drowns. And yet, somehow, something was preserved, not in libraries, but in lullabies, not in scrolls, but in sacred texts, in myths told and retold until they became folklore. The stories traveled farther than the people who first spoke them. They crossed deserts, mountains, oceans. They survived conquest, famine, and forgetfulness. The flood came, and the memory of it clung to humanity like the salt in our blood. Perhaps that's the most remarkable thing. Not that the water rose, but that the story floated, that something in us refused to let go of what had been lost, that across the broken puzzle of cultures and continents, we held on to a warning. We made it sacred, because sacred things endure. And when we listen now, not just to the science, but to the story, we can almost hear it. The slow surge of water over stone, the roar of rivers escaping their beds, the silence after everything has gone, a world wiped clean, waiting to begin again. High in the Andes, where the air thins and the clouds pass so close they seem to whisper secrets, an ancient fortress stands silent, immovable, and strange. Sacsayhuaman. Its walls rise not in straight lines, but in a zigzagging path that moves like lightning carved into stone. Each block fits its neighbors with uncanny precision, no mortar, no binding agent. And yet not even the thinnest blade of grass can pass between them. The stones themselves are irregular, multi-angled, weighing tens and sometimes hundreds of tons. They were shaped to fit together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, not by chance, but by design. Their surfaces curve and bevel, not for beauty, but for seismic resistance. They have endured centuries of earthquakes, while the Spanish structures built atop them have crumbled and fallen. And still, the stones remain, pressed together like the bones of a forgotten colossus. We are told that the Inca built this fortress. And yet, Even among the Inca themselves, there were whispers that the stones were ancient when their ancestors arrived. Legends speak of giants, of divine architects, of techniques passed down by those who had since vanished. No written records survive, and none of the tools used to cut, lift, or place these stones have ever been found. The mystery is not only who built it, but how. Thousands of miles away, in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, another enigma rests beneath centuries of dust and lore. Baalbek, a temple complex that once echoed with worship and now hums with speculation. The Temple of Jupiter stands atop a foundation of stones so massive that even naming their weight feels absurd. The trilithon 3 stones aligned in a single row each exceeds 800 tons. Nearby, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman is even heavier, possibly over 1,000 tons. We cannot move such stones today with any ease. Not with cranes, not with the full force of modern engineering without enormous effort. And yet there they are, quarried, transported, and lifted into place in an age that, by all accounts, should not have had the means. Mainstream archaeology attributes Baalbek's grandeur to the Romans, who indeed left their mark in the upper structures. But the megalithic foundation, weathered and older, tells a quieter tale, one of earlier hands and lost methods. The stones are not just large, they are leveled with startling flatness. They rest on bedrock prepared with such care that no settling has occurred in thousands of years. The joints are dry, yet sealed like pressure-locked vaults. We tend to assume that the past was crude, that ancient hands were clumsy, guided more by trial than by science. But when we look closely at these constructions, at the tight joins, the interlocking shapes, the anti-seismic ingenuity, the scale and geometry, it begins to feel as though we are looking not into the past, but at something parallel, something other, not less, advanced, but differently advanced. A civilization that knew stone like we know code, that treated mass not as an obstacle, but as a medium for precision. Their language was weight and pressure, geometry and alignment, and their monuments still speak it, even if we no longer understand. At Ollantaytambo, stair-stepped terraces rise into the mountains like echoes of an ancient melody. Above them, 6 massive blocks stand in silent formation, red granite transported from a quarry across the valley, over rivers and up steep inclines. The path is treacherous even today. How they moved those stones remains an unanswered question. And yet it was done, not once, but repeatedly, with intention and skill. Nearby, small nubs and knobs protrude from stone surfaces, possibly once used for lifting or anchoring. They appear at sites across the globe, from Peru to Egypt to India. Their purpose is unknown, but their recurrence suggests a shared knowledge, or perhaps a shared origin. And then there is the precision. In Egypt, at the Serapeum of Saqqara, underground chambers house massive granite sarcophagi, each weighing upwards of 70 tons. The interiors are polished to near perfection, with right angles so exact they can be measured with laser tools. These were carved inside tunnels, with no room to maneuver modern equipment. The work is not ornamental, it is mechanical in its perfection. Some surfaces bear no tool marks at all. The implication is not just advanced craftsmanship, but advanced tools, techniques, or understanding that we have not yet rediscovered. In the old world and the new, this pattern repeats. Stones too large, cuts too clean, alignments too perfect, all made by people we assume lacked the wheel, lacked iron, lacked even writing. Yet these people left behind monuments so enduring, so exacting, that they still challenge our imagination. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part. Not that they existed, but that we cannot replicate what they built with the same ease. The mystery is not merely archaeological, it is existential. Were these feats the work of centuries of labor, trial, and error? Were they rituals of devotion so intense that entire generations were spent shaping stone? Or were they the echoes of techniques now lost, technologies or paradigms wiped away in the reset of history? A kind of engineering that doesn't match our timeline or our assumptions. If the Earth was once home to a civilization before ours, or even to brief sparks of genius buried in deep time, these megaliths may be the only surviving clues. Not artifacts in the traditional sense, but messages, statements of ability, proofs etched not in ink but in bedrock, and still they endure. Rain has worn their surfaces. Earthquakes have shaken their foundations. Conquerors have looted and repurposed, yet the core remains, unyielding, impossibly placed. In them, we hear the echo of minds that once understood mass and space in a way we no longer do. They shaped mountains like clay. They defied gravity without leaving instructions. And perhaps they knew, whoever they were, that someday, long after their names had faded, we would look up at these walls, these pillars, these impossible stones, and ask, how? And the stones would answer by standing. In 1936, near London, Texas, not the capital, but a small town nestled in the heart of hill country, a man cracked open a nodule of stone that had eroded out of a creek bed. Inside was something unexpected. Encased in the hardened sediment was a small iron hammer, its wooden handle partially fossilized, its head uncorroded and precise. The surrounding rock was dated by some estimates to the Ordovician period, around 400 million years old, long before even the most primitive mammals had emerged. And yet, here was an unmistakably human tool, sealed away in a time when nothing human should have existed. It's not alone. In 1961, in a desert in California, a geologist named Virginia Maxey was handed another mystery, a rock found by a man collecting geodes near Olancha, split open to reveal what looked like a mechanical object inside a corroded metal cylinder with a porcelain core and a spring-like structure protruding from its center. The object bore an uncanny resemblance to a spark plug, the kind used in early automobiles, and yet it had been found inside rock formations estimated to be at least 500,000 years old. The story was quickly dismissed by mainstream voices. Contamination, hoax, coincidence. But the object, now known as the Koso artifact, still lingers in the margins, as unresolved as the rock that once held it. These are known as OO parts, out-of-place artifacts, objects that challenge our understanding of history, not because they contradict it slightly, but because they defy it entirely. A nail embedded in solid quartz, discovered in Austria in the 1800s. A delicate gold chain found inside a lump of coal in Illinois. Tiny, spiral-shaped metallic objects retrieved from the banks of the Narada River in Russia, so small they require magnification to see, so precisely engineered they resemble components from modern micromachinery, and all of them buried in earth dated to ages before any known civilization. Some of these cases have been debunked or cast into doubt. Others remain in a strange limbo, never confirmed, never fully explained. But even the possibility that just one might be real is enough to raise unsettling questions. How could tools, technologies, or manufactured objects predate humanity itself? Could our timeline be wrong, not by centuries, but by orders of magnitude? Fossils form slowly. Geological processes compress, mineralize, layer by layer, in silence. For an artifact to become encased in ancient rock, it must have been there first, dropped or buried, then forgotten as time closed over it like a lid. And yet these artifacts suggest that someone or something was present long before we were supposed to be. Not in myth, not in legend, but in matter. There are carvings, too. In the ruins of ancient temples in India, bas-reliefs show what some interpret as modern vehicles, submarines, helicopters, flying machines, described in the Vedas as vimanas. In South America, tiny gold figurines shaped like delta-wing aircraft have been discovered in pre-Columbian tombs. Too aerodynamic to be birds, too detailed to be toys. In Colombia, scaled-up models of these so-called Quimbaya artifacts have demonstrated flight stability in wind tunnels, using principles not officially discovered until the 20th century. Skeptics argue these are imaginative interpretations, a kind of pareidolia applied to archaeology. But when these objects appear again and again, across cultures, across continents, across ages, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. There is a suggestion, a murmur through the dust of history, that knowledge once existed which we no longer possess. That invention may not be a straight line, but a cycle. The implications are vast. If even one artifact truly predates its assigned stratum, then the entire framework of human prehistory begins to wobble. Evolution, migration, the rise of tools, all of it becomes less of a gradual climb and more of a broken staircase. There may have been other hands, earlier hands, now lost to erosion and time. Civilizations that rose and fell long before the ones in our textbooks. Cultures whose traces survive only in the briefest anomalies, like footprints left in wet cement, hardened before the tide came in. But why so few? If such civilizations existed, why is the evidence so sparse? The answer may lie in the nature of time itself. For every 1,000 years, erosion, volcanic activity, tectonic shifts, and biological decay erase a little more. Cities collapse into soil, metal corrodes, wood dissolves, memory fades. Given enough time, even a skyscraper could vanish without a trace. And, if these prior builders understood this, if they knew their time was ending, they may have left only what they thought could endure. Objects encased in stone, messages sealed in myth, clues buried deep, waiting for curious minds to uncover them. In a world where we've barely explored our own oceans, where rainforest floors hide ruins swallowed by vines, where deserts conceal buried walls and temples beneath the sand, the possibility remains open. The earth is old, older than our stories, older than our languages, and it has not yet told us everything. Sometimes, the past knocks softly, not with thunder, but with a misplaced tool, a glint of metal in stone, a whisper in granite. And when it does, we must ask ourselves, are we the first to walk this path? Or are we only the most recent echo in a much older song? Off the southern coast of Japan, where the Pacific tides curl and shimmer over coral reefs, there is a place where the seafloor seems to fold into itself. It rises, in stepped platforms, terraces, and angular corridors, all carved into the bedrock, sharp corners, flat walls, and what appear to be stairs descending into shadow. This is Yonaguni, a submerged monument that has stirred controversy since the day it was discovered in the 1,980 seconds. Some say it's a natural formation, sculpted by tectonic forces and erosion. Others are not so sure. The lines are too clean, the shapes too intentional. They speak of planning, of geometry, of hands that once chiseled stone with purpose. And if it is a structure, then it lies beneath the waves not by design, but by memory. Because once, long ago, the sea was not here. Sea levels have not always been what they are now. At the end of the last ice age, vast glaciers melted, releasing water that drowned coastlines and reshaped the edges of continents. Lands that were once dry, fertile, populated, are now hidden under hundreds of feet of water. If civilization had flourished during that time, perhaps not globally, but in scattered pockets, it would have been drawn, as we are, to the sea. And when the sea rose, it would have taken everything with it. At Yonaguni, divers have traced passages and platforms that resemble plazas, pyramids, even amphitheaters. There are parallel lines that run for meters, intersecting at 90 degrees. There are vertical walls that rise with no taper, sharp as a blade. Some rocks seem to bear symbols, carved patterns, or marks that hint at language. Natural or not, the formation has the eerie feeling of a ruin viewed through water's veil. silent, still, but heavy with implication. Thousands of miles west, beneath the waves of the Arabian Sea, another mystery sleeps. Off the coast of Gujarat, near the modern city of Dwarka, sonar scans revealed grid-like patterns beneath the silt walls, foundations, and possible roadways submerged in a place where, according to legend, a great city once stood. In ancient texts, Dwarka was the kingdom of Krishna, built in splendor, then reclaimed by the ocean. For centuries, it was considered myth. But in the early 2000s, marine archaeologists found structures beneath the waves that echoed the old stories. Stone anchors, pillars, basins, entire sections that resembled urban planning. And like Yonaguni, it sat far below the surface, too deep to have been lost in any recent flood. The stories had been there all along, in Sanskrit texts, in oral tradition, in the layered memories of a people who said, again and again, that the sea had taken something from them. And now the ocean, retreating just slightly in the form of science, was beginning to give it back. Then there is Bimini. In the turquoise waters of the Bahamas, a strange formation of stone blocks lies in a line just beneath the waves. The Bimini Road, they call it. It looks like a pathway, a causeway of rectangular stones that stretches for hundreds of feet in a gentle arc. The stones are aligned, leveled, some resting on supports, like ancient paving slabs. Local legend has long connected it to the myth of Atlantis, that ever-persistent memory of a lost world drowned by catastrophe. Skeptics argue the formation is natural beach rock fractured by currents and time, but others believe it is a remnant of a sunken port or harbor, perhaps once belonging to a culture now vanished beneath the Atlantic. All three sites, Yonaguni, Dwarka, and Bimini, exist in the murky space between possibility and certainty. They are not fully understood, not fully accepted, and yet they persist, because they do not stand alone. Across the world, divers have found the ghosts of cities. Pavements beneath the Black Sea, walls off the coast of Cuba, submerged temples in Lake Titicaca. These are not isolated anomalies. They form a pattern, one that stretches along the edges of forgotten coastlines and whispers that perhaps, before the flood, there was something more. Imagine a world 15,000 years ago. The Ice Age was ending, but the melt had not yet come. The air was cool, the seas low, the land vast. In those days, entire continents were larger, their borders extended by plains now lost beneath the sea. If early cultures had begun to gather, to settle, to build these places, now drowned would have been their hearts. And when the floods came, what would be left? A few inland stories, a few scattered memories, and the ruins far below, waiting. We think of history as a ladder, rising steadily from cave to city, from stone to steel. But what if it is more like the tide, advancing, retreating, washing over itself again and again? If there was once an age of stone cities, of mariners and masons, of coastlines dotted with lights, then the sea rising slowly, then suddenly would have erased almost all of it, all except the stones. The sea buries, but it also preserves. It keeps secrets in silence, protects them in pressure and salt. And now, with machines that scan the ocean floor, with divers chasing whispers, with myths guiding the maps, we are starting to see the outlines. Not all at once, just glimpses, a wall here, a plaza there, like fragments of a dream half remembered. What lies beneath the sea may not be the ruins of Atlantis or the temples of gods, but they may be something just as important, evidence of people who came before, who built and shaped and believed, who left behind not grand empires, but quiet monuments, too patient for time and too deep for memory. And if the ocean ever retreats again, it may reveal them fully. But for now, they wait, cold, submerged, and watching. In ancient Egypt, temples were built with such precision that the measurements align with principles found in nature itself. Ratios repeat not only in their architecture, but in the spiral of a nautilus shell, in the branching of trees, in the orbits of planets. The golden ratio, 1.618, is everywhere. In the proportions of the Great Pyramid at Giza, it quietly emerges in the relationship between height and base, a number not just calculated but felt, intuitively honored by builders who left no formula behind. Across an ocean and thousands of years, the same ratio can be found in the Parthenon of Greece, in the stone temples of Angkor Wat, in Mayan city planning, and even in the spiral arrangements of sacred texts laid out by scribes who swore they were merely copying what had always been known. There is a code here not hidden, but embedded, in proportion, in geometry, in the repeated obsession with certain numbers and shapes. Cultures separated by vast distances, speaking different tongues, under different stars, nonetheless return to the same mathematics, not merely for function, but for meaning. Take the number 108. In Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, it recurs constantly. There are 108 beads in a mala, 108 energy lines converging to form the heart chakra, 108 sacred sites. The number is treated as a vessel divine, complete, whole. But why 108? It appears again in astronomy. The average distance between the Earth and the Sun is about 108 times the Sun's diameter. The same ratio exists between the Earth and the Moon, and when these celestial bodies eclipse one another, the visual effect, despite their vastly different sizes, is perfect alignment. The Sun and Moon appear the same size in our sky, as if placed there with intention. How did ancient people, without telescopes or calculators, find this number? And why did they revere it? In Mesoamerica, the ancient Maya were obsessed with cycles of time. They tracked Venus with such precision that their calculations rival modern ephemerides. Their calendar system was not just for marking days, it was cosmological, mythological, mathematical. It contained nested cycles, the Tzolk'in, the Hab, the long count. Numbers like 13, 20, and 260 were central, and somehow these cycles harmonized with lunar phases, solar years, and the transit of Venus, all wrapped in a cosmic logic far beyond simple agriculture. The Dogon people of Mali, an isolated tribe with oral traditions and no written texts, held a detailed knowledge of the Sirius star system. For centuries, they recounted that Sirius had an invisible companion star, dense, small, and circling in a 50-year elliptical orbit. Modern astronomy confirmed this in the 20th century with the discovery of Sirius B, a white dwarf. The Dogon had described its mass, motion, and characteristics with uncanny accuracy, long before the existence of white dwarfs was theorized. All across the world, ancient myths embed numbers, seeds of information, carried forward like fragments of a lost language. The Sumerians used a base 6-0 system, which survives in our modern clock: 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. The decision feels arbitrary until you examine the mathematical elegance of 60, divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, allowing it to function across systems with minimal conflict. It's a perfect base for harmony. But why did they choose it? And why do so many cultures echo the same cosmic blueprint? Some believe these patterns are coincidental, that mathematics is a universal truth, and thus it's natural for cultures to arrive at similar conclusions. But that explanation begins to fray when you realize how specific the overlaps are, not just numbers, but meanings assigned to them. Geometry used not merely to build, but to encode. Shapes inscribed with spiritual power. Mandalas, labyrinths, ziggurats, pyramids, each culture rendering the sacred through symmetry. There's the flower of life, a pattern composed of overlapping circles forming a hexagonal lattice. It has appeared in sacred sites across continents, in the Temple of Osiris in Egypt, in medieval European churches, in ancient Chinese art, and even carved into the granite of the Forbidden City. Always the same design, always with reverence. It holds within it the seed of life, the tree of life, the egg of life, names given not just for metaphor, but for structure. For this shape contains within it the Platonic solids, the building blocks of form in three-dimensional space. Was this shape discovered or remembered? The deeper one looks, the more it feels as though the ancients were not simply building temples or charting stars, they were echoing, repeating something they had inherited, perhaps only in fragments. A body of knowledge once whole, now scattered. They encoded it into monuments, myths, and manuscripts, not just to remember, but to transmit. Across centuries and continents, the same cosmic ratios return, the same mathematical harmonies, the same reverence for number as a doorway, not just to understanding the world, but to touching the divine. Pythagoras claimed that all things were number. The Vedas claimed that the universe sang itself into being through vibration, through frequency, through ratio. Even the pyramids, with their angles and alignments, seem to point not just to the sky, but to the mechanics of it. The Great Pyramid's dimensions encode the value of pi. Its position aligns with cardinal directions with almost impossible accuracy, and beneath it, the chambers resonate, not symbolically, but physically, acoustics engineered to create sound at certain frequencies, vibrating the air like the chamber of an instrument. What were they tuning for? Perhaps none of this is evidence. Perhaps it's only pattern seeking in the dark. But if we imagine, just for a moment, that long ago there was a civilization that understood the deep structures of the cosmos, not technologically, as we do now, but harmonically. Intuitively, then, these echoes make sense. The shared myths, the sacred numbers, the recurring shapes. They aren't inventions, they're reminders. Faint, like half-remembered dreams, or songs you know but can't name. And if that's true, then every spiral, every sacred ratio, every alignment may be a thread, not of faith, but of memory, of something we once knew and are slowly learning to remember. Across deserts and jungles, frozen plateaus and subtropical plains, they rise monoliths of stone shaped like mountains, yet unmistakably man-made. Pyramids. Their presence is so widespread that we take it for granted, like trees or rivers scattered across the continents in curious symmetry. From the limestone giants at Giza to the moss-covered mounds of Mesoamerica, from the buried pyramids of China to the stepped forms of Sudan, they speak with a common geometry, as if humanity had once shared a blueprint and passed it from hand to hand across thousands of miles and millennia. Yet we are told these cultures never met, that they developed in isolation, that the similarities are coincidence. And still, the echoes persist. In Egypt, the pyramids at Giza are aligned with astonishing precision. The Great Pyramid sides face true north, south, east, and west more accurately than most modern buildings. Its base is level to less than an inch. Its internal chambers and passages align with celestial events, the star shafts pointing toward Orion and Sirius, the constellations tied to rebirth and power in Egyptian cosmology. The layout of the three pyramids mimics the belt stars of Orion, shifted slightly, just as they appear in the sky. It is not just a tomb, it is a message in stone, written in the language of the stars. Thousands of years later and half a world away, in the dense forests of Guatemala, another pyramid rises from the canopy, Tikal. Its temples align not only with each other, but with solar and lunar events. At specific times of the year, solstices, equinoxes, the rising sun falls perfectly between their stone crests, casting long shadows and bathing their steps in gold. The Maya were expert astronomers, tracking Venus and eclipses with uncanny precision, and their pyramids became tools for marking the movement of the heavens. They were observatories, calendars, sacred spaces, geometry fused with time. Further south, in Peru, The pyramids of Caral rise from the Supe Valley, older than Giza, their edges softened by centuries of wind. These were not built as tombs or palaces, but as ritual centers, carefully planned, mathematically spaced. The civilization that built them left no writing, yet engineered a city with pyramids, amphitheaters, and irrigation. Their presence stretches back 5,000 years, hinting at a forgotten chapter, a prelude to history that still lingers in dust and shadow. In China, the story is stranger still. Dozens of pyramidal mounds lie hidden beneath layers of earth and forest in the Shaanxi province, some so large they rival the Great Pyramid in scale. For decades, they were dismissed or hidden from view, labeled as imperial tombs and left unstudied. But satellite images reveal their precision, their orientation. Some face the cardinal points. Others align with solstitial sunsets, much like their counterparts half a world away. Their designs vary, some steep, some flat-topped, but the underlying shape persists, a base that widens, a peak that reaches, a stairway to the sky. In the United States, the mounds of Cahokia once stood tall above the Mississippi floodplain. Monk's Mound, the largest, was the center of a city that rivaled London in size during its peak. Its platforms, aligned with the sun, mirror the same astronomical intentions found elsewhere. And nearby, a ring of wooden posts, dubbed Woodhenge, marks the solstices, an ancient calendar, not unlike Stonehenge in England. Why this shape? Why this pattern? Some say the pyramid is a natural evolution, a stackable, stable form, easy to build, enduring through time. But that does not explain the alignments. It does not explain the recurrence of astronomical precision across unrelated cultures, nor does it address the near universal reverence for the stars, for the solstices, for Orion, for Sirius, for the Pleiades, celestial patterns that recur in myth and monument alike. To build a pyramid that aligns with a solstice or star requires more than brute force. It demands observation, measurement, memory, a commitment to sky watching across seasons, across generations. The ancients watched the heavens not passively, but purposefully, as if reading a code written in light, and then they anchored that code to earth with stone. What were they measuring? Time, certainly. The seasons, the planting cycles, the migrations of animals, but also something deeper, a rhythm, a connection between heaven and ground. In nearly every ancient cosmology, the pyramid or mountain was seen as the axis mundi, the world axis, the bridge between realms. It was not merely a structure, but a symbol, earth rising toward sky, man reaching toward the divine. And perhaps they remembered something we have forgotten, a template, older than any single culture, passed not through writing but through architecture. A way to embed knowledge in stone, knowledge of the stars, of time, of balance. Perhaps there was once a source, a root civilization, now erased, that seeded this geometry across the earth. Or perhaps the earth itself, in its cycles and shadows, whispered the same truths to each people in turn, and they answered in stone. There is one more mystery. If you map the locations of many of these ancient pyramids, from Giza to Nazca to Angkor to Easter Island, a curious pattern begins to emerge. A line sometimes called the Earth Grid, or the Great Circle, encircles the planet, connecting these sites in a single geodesic arc. Not perfect, not absolute, but striking enough to make one wonder. Could ancient builders have known the shape of the world? Could they have mapped it? Or were they building on energy lines, as some traditions suggest, ley lines, dragon lines, meridians where the earth itself pulses with unseen force? We do not know. But the pyramids still stand, in jungle and desert, beneath forest and farmland, some buried, some broken, some still gleaming under the stars. And they still align across time, across silence, across all that we have forgotten. Their shape is not just a triangle in stone. It is a question, carved into the face of the earth, across windswept moors and mountain ridges, in valleys carved by ice and time. Scattered stones stand like forgotten sentinels, some lean, some balance. Some stretch skyward with impossible poise, weathered smooth by centuries of rain. These megaliths, henges, dolmens, circles, and walls have long puzzled historians. Their purpose is often elusive, cloaked in myth or silence. But one theory hums just beneath the surface, strange and persistent, that these ancient sites weren't built at random, but placed with intent along invisible threads that crisscross the earth itself. They call them ley lines. First popularized in the early 20th century by Alfred Watkins, a British antiquarian, the concept began as a curious observation. While poring over old maps, Watkins noticed that many ancient landmarks, churches, burial mounds, standing stones, seemed to fall into straight lines across the landscape. Too many to dismiss. He believed these were old trackways, memory paths of a forgotten system of navigation. But others looked deeper, wondering if they marked something more profound, something energetic. As the idea evolved, ley lines became more than alignments. They became arteries, not of stone, but of subtle force, rivers of telluric energy flowing beneath the earth's crust, rising in certain places like springs of invisible current. Sacred sites, according to this view, were not simply monuments. They were capacitors, instruments tuned to the planet's natural frequencies. Stonehenge sits on one, so does the Great Pyramid, the Nazca Lines, Machu Picchu, the temples of Angkor, the ancient city of Teotihuacan. From Ireland to Indonesia, from the Andes to the Himalayas, megalithic sites and ceremonial centers seem to fall on lines that, when mapped, stretch across continents in great arcs and circles. Some claim these formations trace the Platonic solids when projected onto a spherical Earth, forming a geometric lattice that echoes the symmetry of a crystal. A planetary grid. It sounds impossible, fantastical, and yet the symmetry won't go away. The great circle that connects Giza, Petra, Mohenjo-Daro, and Easter Island spans the equator at a slight tilt precisely 30 degrees off-axis. Along this path lie more than a dozen ancient sites, all sharing architectural or astronomical mysteries, as if following a long-lost pattern inscribed into the skin of the earth. But if the ancients knew of these lines, if they could sense or map them, what were they using them for? Some believe the energy is real. Not metaphor, not myth, but measurable. Telluric currents, they say, are low-frequency electric fields generated by the earth itself, moving through rock and water and air. Today, we know that the earth has a magnetic field, a Schumann resonance, a planetary heartbeat that pulses at 7.83 hertzes. Some researchers suggest ancient builders may have tapped into this, whether consciously or intuitively constructing sites that could resonate with the planet's rhythm. Certain stones, particularly quartz-rich ones, can respond to pressure and frequency. They can hum. They can focus energy. At Avebury and Stonehenge, magnetometers have recorded unusual fluctuations in geomagnetic fields. At Newgrange in Ireland, the burial chamber's long passage aligns precisely with the winter solstice, sunrise, and its acoustics amplify low-frequency sounds to a deep, vibratory pitch. In the Andes, the Inca built temples atop natural magnetic anomalies, places where compasses spin and the air feels charged. Even in the modern era, pilots have reported instrument disruptions over certain sites, unexplained by terrain or weather. What if these ancient architects weren't just building for the eye, but for the earth beneath? Many traditions speak of such awareness. The Chinese practice of feng shui is based on the flow of qi, an unseen energy moving through land and structure. In Vastu Shastra, India's ancient science of architecture, temples and homes are aligned with cardinal directions and magnetic fields. Aboriginal songlines in Australia are more than myths. They are living maps, encoded in story, that trace invisible paths across the land. These paths are said to hum with presence, and the songs that name them carry both history and orientation. In all of these systems, the land is not inert. It is alive, pulsing, and the structures upon it must harmonize, like instruments in an orchestra, with the deeper music beneath. Could it be that the oldest builders, the megalithic engineers of prehistory, understood this in ways we have forgotten? That the great stone circles, the stepped pyramids, the sunken temples were placed not merely for ceremony, but for tuning, as if each structure was a note, and together they formed a symphony played across the planet. Skeptics argue there's nothing to these alignments, that when enough points exist on a map, patterns will inevitably emerge, that our brains are wired to find connections, even where none exist. And perhaps they are right. But even then, one is left with the unsettling question: why did so many civilizations separated by time, language, and ocean return to the same forms, the same orientations, the same solar and stellar alignments? Why do so many ancient temples sit atop places of geomagnetic strangeness? And why do we feel something when we stand in these places? Not just awe at the scale, but something quieter, a resonance, a sense that time slows, that silence deepens, that the stones are not merely there, but participating. Perhaps these grids are not highways for travelers, but networks for memory. Perhaps the planet, like us, holds thoughts in electric pulse and magnetic curve, and the ancients learned to write into it with stone, to mark the lees, to tune their sacred spaces to the pulse of the earth. And maybe, just maybe, those lines are still there, humming quietly beneath our feet, waiting, guiding, reminding us that the ground below is not empty. It is alive with forgotten purpose. In the shadowed hollows of stone temples and cavernous sanctuaries, sound moves in strange and beautiful ways. Whispers bounce and return as whispers. A single tone can linger, hover, thicken the air. Chanting sends vibrations through the chest, the bones, even the walls themselves. Somewhere between architecture and atmosphere, the ancients built places that didn't just contain sound. They shaped it, focused it, transformed it into something more than voice, more than music. Into medicine, into mystery, into memory. Deep within the hypogeum of Al-Saflieni in Malta, a chamber carved into limestone over 5,000 years ago, there is a space known as the Oracle Room. It's small, almost modest, yet it has a secret. Speak into it in a low register, and your voice expands not louder, but richer, more dimensional, as if the stone itself is answering. Frequencies between 90 and 120 hertz cause the room to vibrate, not metaphorically, but physically. Researchers have stood inside and felt the sound ripple through their bodies, pulsing through skin and muscle, tingling the spine. Brain scans taken during exposure to these tones show shifts in blood flow to regions associated with vision and emotion. The effect is not imagined. It is biological. The temple speaks to the body. In Chavin de Huantar, high in the Peruvian Andes, an ancient ceremonial center hides beneath the earth, carved into tunnels and passageways. Within its stone corridors, archaeologists have found conch shells modified into instruments, along with evidence that the halls were designed to channel and distort their sound. Visitors describe the acoustic effects as overwhelming. Echoes bounce unpredictably. Footsteps vanish. A single blast from a conch reverberates through the maze like thunder from an unseen sky. It's disorienting, immersive. Some believe it was intended to induce trance, to separate the visitor from ordinary time and space. Others think it was a gateway, a sonic veil that marked the boundary between the mortal world and something older, deeper, sacred. In India, the Vittala temple of Hampi hides a more melodic marvel. Its stone pillars sing, known as the musical pillars. Each emits a different tone when tapped, like a lithophone. The sound is clear, bell-like, and though the pillars are stone, solid and ancient, they resonate as if hollow, tuned to some ancient scale. Modern engineers still puzzle over how this was achieved. No metal, no wires, just stone, shaped and placed with such precision that it becomes an instrument. The Mayan temples at Palenque hold yet another acoustic anomaly. Clap your hands in front of the temple of the feathered serpent, and the echo that returns mimics the chirp of a quetzal, the sacred bird of Mesoamerican lore. The effect is not accidental. The steps, the angles, the curvature of the facade, each one contributes to the transformation of human sound into avian echo. The builders captured a piece of the jungle and embedded it into stone, an auditory illusion designed with mathematical finesse. The voice of the bird, returned by the temple. At the Great Pyramid of Giza, the king's chamber hums. The granite box at its center, long thought to be a sarcophagus, resonates at specific frequencies. When struck or spoken into, it sends vibrations through the chamber and down the passageways. Experiments have shown that the entire pyramid acts like a resonator. Certain frequencies are amplified, others dampened. The shape, the materials, the proportions all seem attuned to harmonics. Whether this was intentional or incidental remains debated, but the consistency of such phenomena across ancient sites suggests a forgotten science, not a series of lucky accidents. What were they doing with this sound? Today, we are only beginning to understand the physiological effects of acoustics. Sound therapy is emerging in modern medicine. Ultrasound to break apart kidney stones, binaural beats to alter brain waves, vibrational frequencies to soothe trauma and pain. Every organ, every bone, every cell in the human body responds to vibration. Water, which makes up the majority of our physical form, is especially sensitive, and the ancients may have known this in their own way, not as a formula, but as a feeling, a wisdom passed through practice, ceremony, rhythm, and echo. In the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, initiates were brought into underground chambers, bathed in incense, silence, and then sound. Their rituals remain secret, lost to time, but accounts suggest the use of tone, chant, and resonance to induce altered states of consciousness. They emerged, changed. Some called the experience a symbolic death and rebirth, others a revelation, the idea that sound could unlock the soul. There is something primal about this. Before language, there was tone. Before instruments, there was voice. Chanting, humming, drumming, the earliest forms of communication were not about meaning, but feeling. Across cultures, sacred rituals involve repetition, rhythm, resonance. The Gregorian chants of European cathedrals, the throat singing of Tuva, the mantras of Tibetan monks all converge on the same principle. Sound not as entertainment, but as conduit, a way to enter stillness, to reach inward or upward. Modern architecture often forgets this. We build for space, not resonance. Our rooms echo flatly, or not at all. But the ancients listened. They built for reverberation, for the way sound curls around a corner, lingers in a dome, pools in an alcove. Their knowledge was not written in books, but etched into limestone, basalt, sandstone, in the weight of a wall, in the curve of a ceiling, in the silence that follows a whisper. Some theories go further, that the ancients used sound not only for ceremony, but for construction, that frequencies were harnessed to lift or cut stone. Tales from Egypt speak of priests moving blocks with the sound of voices alone. Tibetan monks, it is said, once levitated stones using trumpets and chants. We cannot prove these stories, but we can feel their echo in the mysteries that remain. So many temples, so many tones, so many rooms that sing. If there was once a science of sound, it was not a cold, clinical thing. It was lived, felt. It passed through the body as much as the mind, and now, standing in the ruins, we are left with only fragments, a lingering hum, a whisper that refuses to die, a sense that these stones still remember how to sing. High in the hills of Scotland, in places where the wind has carved its own history into the grass and stone, stand the remnants of strange ancient structures. They are forts, or what is left of them walls twisted, fused, and melted into glossy black stone. Not toppled, not scorched, melted, as if someone had once taken the very bones of the earth and softened them like wax. Archaeologists call them vitrified forts, and though they can measure the heat needed to create such a transformation, temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, they cannot explain how, why, or by whom it was done. Granite is stubborn. It does not surrender easily. To melt it requires energy far beyond that of a simple bonfire or lightning strike. And yet, thousands of years ago, someone managed it. In Scotland alone, more than 50 such sites exist. Some are perched atop cliffs, others nestled in valleys. Their walls look as though they were liquefied, allowed to flow, then cooled into glassy fragments. The process is unmistakable, and yet, the method remains out of reach. Some scholars insist the ancient builders deliberately set fire to timber-laced walls to strengthen them, but the pattern of melting is inconsistent with such a technique. Certain portions are fused to perfection, others untouched. Some walls are vitrified through their full thickness, others only on the surface. The heat seems directed, selective, as if focused by a tool rather than a chaotic blaze. Scotland is not alone. Across Europe, in France, Ireland, Germany, and Portugal, vitrified structures appear like scattered memories of a vanished craft. Even further afield, in South America and the Middle East, sites bear stones with edges softened and surfaces glassy, as though sculpted with something far hotter than any known kiln of their time. Legends in these regions whisper of sky fire, of storms that fell from above, of weapons wielded by gods or giants. Sometimes myth is just imagination, but sometimes it is memory wearing a mask. At Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the massive stone walls, each block weighing multiple tons, bear scorch marks and surfaces smoothed into curves that seem impossible with the tools attributed to the builders. Some stones look as though they were pressed into shape rather than chiseled, their corners rounded, their faces rippled like cooling lava. The Inca themselves claimed they did not build these walls but inherited them from an earlier people, a race with knowledge of heat and stone manipulation beyond their own. The ancients spoke of such feats in surprising detail. In the Mahabharata, an Indian epic recounting events thousands of years old, weapons are described that unleash a brightness like 10,000 suns, leaving the ground seared, stone fused, landscapes altered in an instant. Cities crumble, sand turns to glass. The text reads like poetry, yet something uncanny stirs in its imagery. The idea of heat so intense that it reshapes the earth, the sky, the fate of entire nations. Modern readers see echoes of nuclear force. Ancient readers may have seen truth. In the deserts of Libya and Egypt, pieces of pure silica glass scatter the sands, Libyan desert glass, formed by temperatures so extreme that quartz melted into pale green crystal. For decades, scientists attributed this to a meteor strike, but no crater has been found, only a silent field of glass, stretching for miles, its origin still argued. And in the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the world's earliest cities, scattered fragments of melted pottery and fused brick have been uncovered, as if the settlement was struck by a sudden wave of heat. Not fire, not volcanic activity, something else. The question that rises again and again is simple, yet unsettling. Were these places witnesses to natural events, or remnants of a technology we no longer understand? To melt stone deliberately, consistently, in shapes and patterns, requires mastery over heat, not random sparks from the sky, not accidental wildfires. It requires focus, control, knowledge. Some theories suggest the ancients used combinations of chemical additives and high-temperature furnaces, but no evidence of such furnaces has been found near these sites. Others propose mirrors or solar concentrators, vast arrays of polished surfaces that could direct sunlight into burning beams. Such devices did exist in later periods. Archimedes was said to have set ships aflame with reflected light. But these vitrified fort walls predate him by 1,000 years or more. More speculative theories reach further toward technologies lost in the floodwaters of time. Directed energy, resonance heating, plasma, concepts that feel futuristic, yet whisper in old stories. The weapons of the gods in global mythologies often unleash light, fire, and thunder. The Hopi speak of past worlds destroyed by the shedding of fire. The Norse tell of Surt, whose flaming sword ends an age. The Irish myths describe battles that left the land scorched and stones fused. Could these be echoes of memories older than civilization itself? Or are they metaphors for events beyond comprehension? Volcanic eruptions, lightning storms, meteors, but preserved as poetry in the human mind. Standing before a vitrified fort, the question feels heavier. The stones are not symbolic. They are tangible, silent witnesses. They bear the scars of heat so intense that rock behaved like clay. Yet we cannot reproduce their condition easily, even with modern equipment. The energy required is immense. The uniformity of melting in certain areas implies intention, not accident. And then there is the deeper possibility that the ancients were not wielding technology as we understand it, but something more elemental. A knowledge not of machines, but of forces. A relationship with nature that allowed them to focus heat in ways we can no longer grasp. After all, the same ancient cultures who raised monoliths and built precision-aligned pyramids understood acoustics, astronomy, and geometry with an intuition that modern scholars still struggle to unravel. Perhaps their knowledge of heat was part of the same forgotten suite of skills, a science not written in books, but passed through ritual and memory, lost when the world changed. Whatever the truth, the black stones remain, melted, glossy, unyielding. They hint at a fire we no longer command, a force we no longer remember. In the long quiet of deep time, evolution usually whispers. It shapes life slowly, almost lazily, over eons, polishing a claw here, lengthening a neck there, letting the tide of mutation drift gently forward like sand through fingers. But every so often, something breaks that rhythm. A leap appears in the fossil record, a sudden jump in form or function that feels more like a bolt of lightning than the usual crawl of change. For most species, these rare moments are a puzzle. For us, they are a mirror. Human evolution holds many such sparks. And perhaps the strangest of all is the moment our minds ignited. Roughly 2 million years ago, our distant ancestors began to change. Homo habilis gave way to Homo erectus. The brain began to swell not by a little, but dramatically, from about 600 cubic centimeters to over 1,000, then beyond. By the time Homo sapiens appeared, it had doubled again. This was not a slow upward slope. It was a steep ascent, like fire catching dry grass. Along with this explosion in brain size came something even more baffling: the birth of symbolic thought, art, language, music, burial, tools not just for hunting but for making other tools, societies, stories, a mind that could imagine. No one fully understands why. Brain size alone doesn't explain it. Other animals have large brains too. What mattered was how we used it. At some point, no one knows exactly when a threshold was crossed. The brain became not just a tool of survival, but a forge of imagination. We began to paint animals we hadn't seen, carve gods from stone, map the stars, sing to the dead. And we did this almost everywhere, around the same window in time. In the archaeological record, it's called the Great Leap Forward. But why did it happen? Darwinian theory provides a framework. Of course, mutation, selection, adaptation. But the speed and scope of the shift troubles even seasoned anthropologists. Some suggest environmental pressures forced rapid innovation. Others believe cooking and diet allowed surplus energy to fuel larger brains. But none of these fully explain the timing or the shared emergence of higher cognition across distant human populations who supposedly had no contact. And then there's the DNA. Buried in our genome are stretches of code that defy easy categorization. Some have no known ancestry. Others appear with sudden precision, as if edited rather than evolved. One region, known as HAR1, changed more in the human line than in the entire lineage of other mammals, despite being highly conserved across species. Another, FOXP2, is tied directly to speech and language, our ability to communicate abstract ideas. These mutations are not mere accidents. They are coordinated, clean, almost surgical, and their effects were profound. There is a theory, not often spoken aloud in mainstream halls, but whispered across disciplines, that something intervened. Not necessarily a being, perhaps a force, an event, a consciousness. That the sudden emergence of symbolic thought was not the culmination of slow evolution, but a spark lit by something we do not yet understand. Some call it panspermia, the idea that life, or at least intelligence, was seeded from the stars. Others speak of directed mutation, a nudge from within or without. Ancient myths are filled with such stories: Prometheus gifting fire, serpents offering fruit, sky gods descending to teach language and agriculture. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, beings from the heavens who shaped humanity. The Dogon tribe of Mali described star visitors long before Sirius B was discovered. Even Genesis whispers of knowledge delivered too fast, too soon. Are these simply metaphors? Archetypal dreams buried in collective memory? Or are they something else? Geneticists have discovered that a large portion of our DNA is not human in origin, not in the modern sense. Some of it comes from viruses, incorporated into our code through ancient infections. Some from now extinct hominins, like Neanderthals and Denisovans, through long-forgotten encounters. But there are fragments that seem older still, untouched by known evolutionary branches, ghost lineages, sequences that sit like bookmarks, waiting to be understood. Perhaps they are the residue of an intelligence that shaped us, or perhaps they are echoes of a forgotten version of ourselves. The curious thing is how alone we are. Of all species on Earth, only we reached this cognitive summit. Only we look up at the stars and wonder. Dolphins communicate, yes. Elephants mourn. Crows remember faces. But none draw constellations or write symphonies. No other species builds temples, tells jokes, or asks why. For a planet teeming with life, that loneliness is striking. Evolution is generous with form, but stingy with consciousness. And still, the leaps continue. In a mere few thousand years, we went from caves to spacecraft, from stone knives to quantum computers. Evolution is not supposed to move that fast, not on its own. Culture builds upon itself, yes, but even culture needs a platform, and ours, our brains, our capacities seem built for something more, something ahead of their time, as if we were prepared for a future that hadn't yet arrived. There's a silence in the fossil record where answers should be, a pause between the creature that hunted with rocks and the being who carved spirals into bone, who sang to the moon and imagined gods. Something happened in that silence. Maybe it was just a confluence of factors, a perfect storm of mutation, climate, and luck. But maybe, just maybe, it was a hand brushing lightly across the strands of our code, tuning the strings of our DNA, like an instrument, not to control, not to dominate, but to awaken, to remember. In nearly every corner of the ancient world, a quiet pattern repeats itself, a story not shouted but whispered, buried beneath layers of dust and time. It is the tale of the first ones, the bringers of knowledge, the civilizing spirits, the sky people. Known by many names and painted in many forms, they appear in myth after myth, not as distant gods beyond reach, but as beings who walked among us. Not creators of the world, but sculptors of culture, givers of language, law, astronomy, agriculture, and fire. And always, they come from above. In ancient Egypt, Thoth was the god of writing, measurement, and the moon a scribe, who taught humanity how to speak in symbols and reckon the stars. He is sometimes depicted as an ibis-headed man, and sometimes as more than a man, a glowing figure whose wisdom predates the pyramids themselves. The Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time, when the gods walked the earth, long before recorded history. In their temples and texts, this age was not metaphor but memory, though veiled in mythic language. They believed civilization was not invented, but remembered, passed down from those who came before. Far across the ocean, in the dense jungles and sun-scorched plateaus of Mesoamerica, the story echoes once more. The Olmecs, and later the Maya and Aztec, told of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the bringer of maize and mathematics, of calendars and sacred geometry. He arrived from the east, taught, and then departed, promising to return. He was not alone. Viracocha, the Inca creator god, emerged from the sea after a great flood to teach the survivors of a ruined world. He too was described as tall, bearded, and glowing, often in white. And he too vanished into the horizon, walking across water as if returning home. India, in its vast web of scriptures and songs, holds similar threads. The Vedas describe beings called the Devas, luminous ones from the skies, bearing advanced knowledge and weapons of unthinkable power. They rode flying crafts known as vimanas, machines that sound eerily like aircraft or rockets. Their battles were fought not just on land, but in the sky and space, with rays of heat, beams of light, and fire that scorched entire cities. But alongside this warlike imagery were moments of grace, gifts of medicine, architecture, music, and mantra. They did not only fight, they taught. The Dogon people of Mali, isolated and far from the centers of ancient empire, possess knowledge of the Sirius star system that puzzled astronomers for decades. They speak of the Nomo, amphibious beings who came from Sirius B, an invisible companion star to Sirius A, only confirmed by modern science, with powerful telescopes. Yet the Dogon knew of its density, its orbit, and its faintness long before such tools existed. Their oral traditions describe the Nomo as bringers of order, of weaving and agriculture, descending in a spinning vessel that churned the earth and split the sky. In Sumer, one of the first known civilizations, the records etched into clay tablets tell of the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. They brought kingship, tools, and law. They divided time into units still used today. Their arrival, according to the Sumerians, marked the beginning of civilization. Before them, humanity wandered. After them, we built. All of these stories, scattered across continents and centuries, seem to describe the same arrival beings from the sky, who arrived not to conquer, but to guide, not to enslave, but to elevate. Their forms differ, sometimes serpents, sometimes winged, sometimes shining like metal or stars, but their function is consistent. They appear at the edge of disaster, or in the twilight of chaos, and from them, the seeds of culture bloom. Skeptics argue these are metaphors, personifications of natural forces or psychological archetypes, and perhaps they are. But one cannot help but notice the similarities, the serpentine imagery, the luminous skin, the departure by flight, the insistence that they will one day return. These are not minor local legends. They are the scaffolding of ancient memory. Myths are not always history, but they are rarely born from nothing. The question is whether these stories preserve echoes of a forgotten epoch, perhaps a civilization so advanced it seemed divine to those who remained, perhaps visitors from beyond, or descendants of survivors from an earlier age, bearing knowledge like embers from a dying fire. Or perhaps the tales speak of something even stranger, encounters with intelligence not bound by space or time, beings who emerge when needed, then vanish, leaving only symbols behind. There is also the shape of the serpent twisting through myth like a filament of forgotten light. From Quetzalcoatl to the Naga of India, from the rainbow serpents of Aboriginal lore to the coiled DNA within our cells, the serpent often carries dual meanings: danger and wisdom, chaos and creation. In many cultures, it is the teacher, the revealer of hidden truths. It sheds its skin. It sees in the dark. Maybe the serpent was chosen because it moved close to the earth, but came from somewhere else. Or maybe it was never about snakes at all. When ancient temples align perfectly with celestial movements, when mythological figures describe technologies we've only just begun to understand, when oral traditions preserve knowledge beyond their means, it's worth listening not literally perhaps, but deeply, symbolically, historically, with imagination and respect. We do not know who the first teachers were, but the ancients seemed certain they were not alone when they began, that someone or something offered them a path, a pattern, a blueprint for building. And in the quiet between stars, in the shadow of stone and story, those first ones still watch, or wait, not as gods, but as memory, dreaming in our bones. In times of collapse, when libraries turn to ash and cities fall silent, not all knowledge disappears. Some of it slips underground, into whispered symbols and guarded rituals, waiting like a seed in winter for a more forgiving spring. Across cultures and centuries, there have always been those who chose to remember in secret, not to hoard truth, but to protect it from fire, from conquest, from forgetfulness. In their hands, the stories of lost worlds did not vanish. They became patterns carved into stone, chants passed in darkness, diagrams drawn in margins, hidden in plain sight. Long before the word esoteric ever existed, ancient schools of thought trained minds not only in mathematics and astronomy, but in meaning. Egypt had its house of life, a temple tradition said to preserve the knowledge of the gods. Greece had the Eleusinian mysteries, rites so profound their initiates refused to speak of them for life. In India, sacred geometry encoded the divine into architecture. In China, Taoist masters traced energy through meridians, mapping the body as a mirror of the sky. And always there were symbols: the spiral, the eye, the cube, the tree. Shapes repeated not because of fashion, but because of memory. The knowledge that survived was rarely written plainly. It was embedded in myth, wrapped in allegory, buried in structure. A cathedral ceiling wasn't only decorative, it was a map of the cosmos. A labyrinth wasn't merely a puzzle, it was a path to inner truth. To the untrained eye, these were curiosities. To the initiate, they were instruction. And while official histories often erased or ridiculed them, these quiet traditions endured, passed from teacher to student, like a fragile flame, cupped in both hands. The Hermetic texts, attributed to the enigmatic Hermes Trismegistus, speak of a world where as above, so below. They describe a correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm, the stars and the soul, the heavens and the hand. This was not superstition, but a lens through which to view existence as unified, meaningful. The Emerald Tablet, a brief but powerful text, speaks of the one thing, the primal source from which all creation unfolds. Its language is poetic, abstract, almost alchemical, but it hints at a truth older than religion, that the world is not random, and neither are we. Mystery schools, like those of the Pythagoreans or the Druids, were less concerned with doctrine and more with direct experience. Through silence, meditation, and symbol, they taught seekers to see the invisible architecture behind the world. Pythagoras, famed for his theorem, believed numbers weren't just tools but living forces. The Druidic bards wove oral histories that layered truth into rhythm, song, and verse. These were not academic institutions. They were vessels of remembrance. And then, over time, came the societies. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Often misunderstood, often mythologized, these groups claimed lineage from ancient orders long vanished. Whether or not those lines are historical in the way we define history, they serve a purpose continuity. Their rituals draw from old rites. Their symbols echo older truths. The compass and square, the all-seeing eye, the checkerboard floor, all speak in languages that predate Latin or Greek. Geometry is their scripture, light their sacrament. It's easy to dismiss such things in a world ruled by science and proof. But there's a reason these traditions endured. They didn't survive because of their secrecy. They survived because they offered a way to hold paradox, because they valued mystery without needing to solve it. Not everything sacred needs to be decoded. Some things are kept secret, not to exclude, but to protect. Not from others, but from time itself. And the protection was necessary. History is filled with flames. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, the destruction of Mayan codices, the razing of temples in Mesopotamia. Empires conquer not just land, but memory. And yet, in the wake of each fire, something remains. A shard of knowledge embedded in folklore, a pattern hidden in a mosaic, a glyph that doesn't quite fit the official timeline. Somewhere, someone remembers, even if they don't understand why. Sometimes, the knowledge passes through art. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks are filled with mirrored writing and impossible machines, but also with anatomical studies so advanced they rival modern science. Some say he was a member of secret orders. Others believe he simply listened to what others ignored. The same has been said of Nikola Tesla, who spoke of tapping into the frequency of the earth, of energy moving like breath through the body of the world. What were they hearing? Perhaps the same song the ancients once did. A frequency carried in stone and symbol, waiting to be tuned into again. Modern initiates no longer gather in candlelit chambers. The rituals are different now, subtler, scattered, but the knowledge still surfaces, in dreams, in symbols that haunt architecture, in stories that keep being told, over and over, across time and tongue, stories of floods and stars, of sacred measurements in cosmic balance, stories that carry fingerprints too consistent to be coincidence. And maybe that was always the plan, not to build one great monument that could be toppled, but to scatter the knowledge like seeds, to hide it in places no fire could reach. The rhythm of a poem, the angle of a temple, the shape of a myth, to embed it in the collective unconscious so deeply that, even without a teacher, we might someday remember it again, not by reading it, but by recognizing it. And so the symbols continue, carved into stone, painted on ceilings, whispered in lullabies, carried in the hands of those who never called themselves masters, but only stewards, guardians of the flame that never went out. In an age before satellites, before telescopes, before compasses or clocks, ancient civilizations looked up at the sky and somehow knew things they should not have known. Their monuments tracked stars with uncanny accuracy. Their myths encoded cycles of celestial motion, and in texts carved into stone or passed down in sacred verse, there lived fragments of insight that still puzzle scholars today. It's easy to dismiss these as coincidence, or to assume the knowledge bloomed much later and was retroactively ascribed to the ancients. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Again and again, we find traces of a precision that doesn't fit the tools we believe they had or the timelines we've drawn for them. Take the shape of the Earth. In school books, we're often taught that belief in a round planet emerged slowly, that it wasn't until the time of Greek philosophers or even the age of exploration that the idea truly took hold. But the record tells a different story. Thousands of years earlier, the Vedas of ancient India described a spherical Earth, spinning through space in a cycle of vast ages. Pythagoras, born more than 2 millennia ago, not only taught of a round Earth but spoke of its motion and musical harmony. Eratosthenes, with nothing but shadows and sticks, measured the Earth's circumference with astonishing precision within a few percentage points of modern measurements. How did he even think to try? The Egyptians, too, hinted at something deeper. The Great Pyramid of Giza, aligned with the cardinal directions to within a fraction of a degree, reflects a geometric awareness that suggests more than earthly surveying. Some researchers argue it encodes values like the golden ratio and even the dimensions of the Earth itself. The perimeter of the pyramid, multiplied by a specific factor, yields a figure close to the Earth's equatorial circumference. Coincidence? Perhaps, but coincidences don't usually repeat across cultures that, supposedly, never met. The precession of the equinoxes is another puzzle, a slow wobble in the Earth's axis. It takes about 26,000 years to complete. That's far too subtle for a single generation to notice. Yet the ancient Hindus divided time into yugas, cyclical ages, whose lengths eerily mirror this cosmic rhythm. The Mayans, with their long count calendar, tracked time in vast spans, aware of astronomical cycles measured in tens of thousands of years. The Dendera zodiac in Egypt, carved into stone and weathered by centuries, may encode this precessional knowledge too. It's as if these civilizations inherited a clock they didn't build, but knew how to read. And then there is Sirius. To the naked eye, Sirius appears as a single, brilliant point in the night sky so bright it has been called the dog star for millennia. But it is not alone. Sirius is actually a binary system, Sirius A and Sirius B, locked in an orbital dance around each other. Sirius B is a white dwarf, small and faint, invisible without a telescope. It wasn't even confirmed by Western astronomers until the 19th century. Yet the Dogon people of Mali, whose oral traditions stretch back centuries, have long described Sirius B. They knew of its 50-year orbit, its density, its gravitational influence. They spoke of it not as myth, but as fact. Their stories tell of beings from Sirius who came in a vessel that spun as it descended, beings who brought knowledge and order. Skeptics argue that this information was somehow passed to them by modern sources, but early anthropologists recorded the Dogon lore before such knowledge had become widespread and before the properties of Sirius B were fully understood by science. So where did it come from? Maybe the answer lies not in alien visitation, but in a deeper, more human mystery, an inheritance, a thread of ancient knowledge passed down through time, filtered through story and symbol, barely surviving the erosion of empire and the burning of libraries. Perhaps the earliest civilizations were not our beginnings, but our re-beginnings, survivors of a forgotten age, echoing the science of a lost world through temples, songs, and stars. The Sumerians were among the first to chart the heavens in clay, yet their understanding of planetary motion was shockingly complex. They knew of celestial bodies that should have been invisible to them. Their gods were often associated with planets, and their creation myths included ordered movement in the sky. The Babylonians, inheriting this system, predicted eclipses with methods that remain impressive even today. Across the ocean, the Mayans built observatories with no glass, no mirrors, just perfectly aligned stone. They charted Venus with exquisite accuracy and predicted celestial events centuries into the future, all without telescopes, all without the mathematics we now deem essential. And they weren't alone. The builders of Stonehenge tracked solstices and lunar cycles. The architects of Chichen Itza designed temples where shadows of serpents slither across the stones only during specific alignments. Even Göbekli Tepe, the ancient sanctuary buried in Turkish soil, appears to encode celestial symbolism in its towering T-shaped pillars, stars carved where eyes might be, constellations frozen in stone. To see the Earth from space, to grasp its curves and cycles, is a modern privilege. But to feel those truths from the ground, using only sky and thought, was the work of those we too often call primitive. And yet, their monuments outlast us. Their math appears where it shouldn't. Their myths speak in terms we're only now beginning to understand. We like to believe that knowledge climbs in a single line, upward through time, from ignorance to enlightenment. But what if that line is broken? What if, long before the rise of modern science, there were moments, fleeting, fragile, when humanity held a deeper understanding of the cosmos, when insight wasn't written in textbooks, but carved in temples, hidden in calendars, veiled in allegory? And what if that knowledge wasn't entirely lost? Maybe it waits for us to notice, to look again at the stars, not as cold points of light, but as the mirrors they've always been, reflecting not only what is, but what once was, and perhaps what could be again. There are places on Earth where the air feels different, as though the atmosphere itself has memory. You step into them, and the silence deepens. Time stretches, light shifts, and even if you can't explain why, something in your body recognizes the change. These are the places the ancients marked with stone and story hilltops, crowned with circles, temples aligned to distant stars, sacred, wells where wishes are whispered still. In nearly every culture, these locations were more than ceremonial grounds. They were thresholds, the edge of one world and the beginning of another. Some called them thin places, not thin in size, but in separation, where the veil between physical and unseen reality wore away, and the two could briefly meet. And rather than stumble upon these places by accident, it appears that ancient builders sought them out deliberately. Over and over again, megaliths rise not randomly, but according to a geometry that speaks to the sky, to the Earth's hidden rhythms, and perhaps to something deeper still. Consider Stonehenge, not merely a pile of stones, but a precise astronomical tool. Its massive sarsens and lintels form alignments that track the solstices and eclipses, set like gears into the landscape to mark the turning of the year. But it's not just about time. The ground beneath it hums with subtle magnetism. Studies have shown variations in the Earth's magnetic field in these regions, imperceptible to most instruments, but perhaps not to the human body. And across Britain, Stonehenge is only one node in a vast network of ancient paths and monuments that seem to be arranged along invisible lines, straight and sure, stretching for miles like threads in a web. These lines are known as ley lines, a term coined in the early 20th century, but based on much older observations. Temples, burial mounds, churches, and standing stones often fall along these paths, as though their locations were chosen according to some forgotten blueprint. Critics call it coincidence, but the precision is hard to ignore, especially when the alignments cross rugged terrain that would have been challenging to survey even today. Why build here? Why again and again along these invisible tracks? It's not just Europe. Across the world, sacred sites reflect this obsession with geometry and placement. The Nazca lines of Peru, enormous. Geoglyphs, etched into desert rock, serve no clear practical purpose, yet some stretch for kilometers in perfect straightness, pointing to solstices and star risings. In Cambodia, the temples of Angkor Wat are laid out in a mandala that mirrors the constellation Draco. In Egypt, the pyramids align with Orion's belt with uncanny accuracy, grounded in earthly mass but reaching for something celestial. It's as if ancient architects believed that place mattered not just physically, but metaphysically. that the ground held currents of energy, and that by placing stone upon it with the right intention, something could be activated. Perhaps it wasn't the building itself that made the place sacred, but the recognition of what was already there. Some energetic pulse, some intersection of Earth's deeper structure. And maybe, by marking it, they created a conduit, a portal, not a science fiction gateway, but something subtler, a lens, a focus, a crossing point between worlds. Many ancient stories speak of such crossings. In Ireland, stone circles were said to be meeting places for the Tuatha De Danann, a mythical race who came from the sky and vanished into the earth. In the American Southwest, Hopi elders speak of sipapu openings to the spirit world, often located in caves or within certain canyons. In India, certain temples were not just shrines, but yantras, geometric diagrams in 3 dimensions, designed to concentrate spiritual force. Their spires echoed the mountain peaks above them. Their foundations followed the invisible lines of the land beneath. And often, sound played a role. Chambers designed to resonate at specific frequencies. Stones that ring like bells when struck. Echoes that carry on for seconds longer than they should. It's as though these sites weren't simply built to observe the cosmos, but to interact with it, to attune, to receive, to remember. What were they listening for? Perhaps something beneath us. The earth, after no, all, is not silent. It pulses with Schumann resonances, low-frequency electromagnetic waves that encircle the planet between the ground and the ionosphere. Some researchers have suggested that these frequencies can affect human consciousness, especially in states of deep meditation. Could ancient sites have been chosen to amplify these effects? To open the mind, even momentarily, to something beyond itself? There is also geometry, the kind not taught in schools. Sacred geometry, where numbers and ratios take on spiritual meaning. The golden ratio, the flower of life, the hexagram and the spiral. These forms appear again and again in sacred architecture, from the mandalas of Tibetan Buddhism to the rose windows of Gothic cathedrals. They encode not just beauty, but principle and harmony, the mathematics of life. In places like Newgrange in Ireland, sunlight on the winter solstice floods the inner chamber for only a few minutes each year, illuminating carvings whose purpose remains unknown. In Chavin de Huantar, high in the Peruvian Andes, tunnels beneath the temple produce disorienting acoustic effects, whispers that seem to come from nowhere. And at the temple of Hathor in Dendera, images on the ceiling appear to show celestial alignments that span thousands of years, as if marking times when certain doors open. Doorways to what? Not necessarily other worlds, but other ways of being. Thresholds between noise and silence, between confusion and clarity. Moments when the rhythm of the universe aligns just so, and something slips through. A memory, a message, a mood. The sacred site in this view is not a monument, but an instrument. Not an altar, but a mirror. And perhaps we've forgotten how to look into it. But the land remembers. The stones remain. Their alignments still point to the stars. Their circles still hold silence. And if we walk among them with the right questions, we might feel what the ancients did not answers, but presence. Not facts, but knowing. There are places where the boundary thins, and when you find one, you don't just see it, you feel it, see you. In the quiet hours of the evening, when the mind softens and the boundaries of the believable stretch just a little wider, a question rises from the depths of our oldest stories. What if giants once walked the earth, not in fairy tales or the exaggerated parables of folklore, but in the deep shadow of history before the layers of soil and skepticism settled over their memory? The idea lingers not only in myth, but in bones, in burial mounds, and in the whispers of a world that may have been stranger than we allow ourselves to believe. Nearly every ancient culture left behind tales of beings larger than life. In the Hebrew scriptures, the Nephilim are described as giants, born of a union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. In Norse sagas, the Jotnar were powerful, elemental beings, some benevolent, others destructive, locked in, perpetual struggle with the gods. Greek mythology gave us the Titans, vast and primeval, predating even Olympus. Native American legends from tribes as diverse as the Paiute, Choctaw, and Sioux speak of a race of towering red-haired people, fierce and ancient, who were eventually wiped out after long conflict. At first glance, these stories seem like allegory symbols of power, forces of nature anthropomorphized into titans and terrors. But the persistence of the theme across continents and centuries invites deeper questions. Why do these stories repeat in lands separated by oceans, among people who, we're told, had no contact with one another? Then there are the bones. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers across the United States published reports of oversized skeletons unearthed from burial mounds, often described as standing 8, 10, or even 12 feet tall. Some were said to have double rows of teeth, elongated skulls, or massive tools buried alongside them. The accounts were strange, sometimes sensational, but they were numerous, found in small-town gazettes, early Smithsonian records, and even in farmers' journals scribbled in the margins of a more pragmatic world. Many of these stories have been lost, dismissed, or relegated to the shadowy corners of fringe archaeology. The Smithsonian itself has been accused without proof of having collected and quietly stored away anomalous skeletons that didn't fit the accepted model of human history. It's a claim that lives more in speculation than confirmed fact, but its persistence reflects a wider feeling that something has been forgotten or perhaps hidden just beneath the surface. In Lovelock Cave, Nevada, guano miners in the early 1900s uncovered a cache of human remains and artifacts that local Paiute oral traditions said belonged to a race of Si-Te-Ka, red-haired giants who once warred with their ancestors. The recovered bones, according to early accounts, included skulls of unusual size. Some photographs still exist, others do not. Over time, official investigations reduced the finds to tall individuals, perhaps 6 feet, maybe a little more. Not giants, they say just larger than average humans. But the stories of the miners, of the tribes, and of the early records paint a different picture, and they haven't entirely gone away. Across the ocean, in places like Sardinia, similar tales arise. Giant tombs, megalithic constructions, and local legends of immense beings who once ruled the hills. In parts of South America, elongated skulls like those found in Paracas, Peru, add to the mystery. Though most anthropologists attribute their shape to cranial deformation, the practice itself raises questions. Why did ancient cultures so often mimic the form of a being with a different skull shape? Was it fashion, status, or memory? Some researchers suggest that these giants might not have been literal 9-foot beings, stomping across the earth, but a branch of early humanity, taller, stronger, perhaps with different traits now extinct, their remnants scattered, misunderstood, or purposefully erased. The Denisovans, for example, are a recently confirmed branch of archaic humans, known from only a few bones but with genetic traces in modern populations. Some scientists believe they were tall, robust, and physically powerful. We've only just begun to understand them. There's also the question of scale in ancient architecture. The stones of Baalbek, weighing hundreds of tons, seem almost too large to be practical for human use. In South America, doorways are carved that appear sized for someone far taller than the average person of the time. Were they meant for deities, for spirits, or simply for someone who once walked among them? Language adds to the mystery. Words like Titan, giant, and Anakim come down to us as symbols of size, but they may have once described something more literal. Over time, the memories blur. Myth becomes metaphor, bones become curiosities, misfiled, or misunderstood. It is also possible, some say likely, that the stories of giants are a cultural echo of awe. In the presence of someone taller, stronger, or stranger, memory expands. A man of 6.5 feet might become a giant in the tales of his descendants. But that doesn't explain the bones, the artifacts, the patterns. Something happened. Something left an imprint deep enough to cross continents and cultures. Whether it was a distinct race, a forgotten chapter of evolution, or a spiritual symbol of power and fear, we cannot say for certain. But the stories persist, and bones, sometimes, refuse to stay buried. In forgotten hills and shadowed valleys, beneath layers of dust and denial, the earth remembers. And when we listen closely, we might hear their footsteps again, faint, enormous, fading into myth, but never quite disappearing. There is a silence in history, a gap that yawns wide between the world we think we know and the echoes of something older, grander, lost. When we look back through time, past the records and ruins, past the polished myths and measured timelines, we find not just evidence of an ancient civilization, but a question hanging in the stillness. If they were here, then where did they go? Every great story has an ending, and perhaps this one does too, but it's not written in clear lines or carved in stone. It's whispered in collapse, hinted at in sudden disappearances, and scattered across the globe in fragments that don't quite fit together. Cities swallowed by jungle. Stones half finished, as if the hands that shaped them were suddenly called away. Knowledge that burned, buried, or simply faded, leaving behind only hints of what might have been. It is not the fall we see, it is the absence. We like to imagine that civilizations rise slowly, like mountains, and fall just as gradually. That decline is a long decay, a slow forgetting. But sometimes it is not. Sometimes it comes all at once. A fire, a flood, a failure so complete it leaves behind only riddles. What could have ended it? Climate is one possibility. The end of the last ice age brought floods, yes, but also massive shifts in temperature and rainfall. Entire ecosystems changed in the span of centuries. A fertile region can become a desert. Rivers can vanish. Crops can fail. In places like the Sahara, once green, dotted with lakes and thriving life, we find the ancient bones of hippos, crocodiles, even human settlements now buried beneath endless sand. A garden turned into a graveyard by the slow tilting of the earth and the silent drift of climate. Or perhaps it was war. If a civilization grew vast, spanning continents, unified in symbol and story, it may have fractured under its own weight. Competing factions, clashes of ideology, the rise of power and its inevitable abuse. We know this pattern. It plays out again and again. Rome, Byzantium, Angkor. And when technology or knowledge becomes concentrated in the hands of the few, a single break can unravel everything. Kill the scribes, and the language dies. Burn the temple, and the science is lost. No computers, no satellites, just scrolls, fragile minds, stone. Some say the fall came from the sky. Stories of fire and thunder, of stars falling, of a time when the heavens turned against the earth, these recur again and again. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests a comet or asteroid struck the planet around 12,800 years ago, triggering a sudden deep freeze and a wave of extinctions. There are black layers of soot in the geological record, nanodiamonds, melted glass, scars carved into the ice. Could this have been the death blow? Or perhaps not a single event, but a cascade, the perfect storm. Environmental pressure weakens the system. Infighting breaks its unity. A catastrophe shatters what remains. And in the chaos that follows, memory burns. There are no survivors in a collapse, only survivors of memory. And memory, we've learned, is fragile. Oral traditions can stretch far, but they bend. They change. distorted with each retelling. After the fire, the story is not of what was lost, but of what survived. And what survived was often just enough to confuse us centuries later. Symbols with no source, technologies with no clear origin, myths that feel too real, legends of golden ages, of beings who came before, of knowledge once held and now scattered like ash on the wind. Maybe that was the point. Maybe they knew the end would come not just for them, but for all things. The cycle of rise and fall is written into the bones of this planet. Forests burn and regrow. Stars explode and scatter their elements into new suns. And civilizations, for all their brilliance, are no different. So perhaps, rather than fight the inevitable, they planned for it, left clues not to preserve themselves, but to speak to us, not with words, but with structure, with stone, with myth, a language that could outlast collapse. The pyramids, aligned to stars that have shifted only slightly across millennia. The maps, drawn before the ice retreated. The myths, scattered yet strangely unified across continents. Each one a thread, each one a whisper. Not enough to rebuild, but enough to remember if we choose to listen. And perhaps that's why we feel them even now. Not just as stories, but as absences. A sense of something missing, just beyond the reach of logic. We walk through ruined temples and wonder not who built them, but why we stopped building like this. We look at monoliths and megaliths and feel a kind of grief not for what is there, but for what is not. The first collapse was not just the loss of stone cities or sacred texts. It was the falling away of a way of seeing, a relationship between human beings and the world they inhabited, and perhaps something beyond it, a unity that dissolved, leaving behind the scattered puzzle pieces we try now to reassemble, one fragment at a time. Whatever ended that civilization, be it sky fire or shifting soil, betrayal or blindness, it did not end the story. It only paused it. And maybe, just maybe, the final gift of those who came before was not their legacy, but their silence. An invitation to rediscover, to reimagine, to rebuild, if we can see beyond the noise of now. Because every ending, no matter how complete, leaves behind seeds, waiting in the dark, sleeping beneath the ruins, ready to grow again. There is something deep in us, something ancient, that stirs when we look up at the stars. A pull we cannot explain, not entirely, that draws our eyes to Orion's belt or the curve of the Milky Way, as if searching for something long lost. It's not just wonder. It feels older than that, as though memory itself were looking back, as though some quiet part of us remembers. Even as children, we draw spirals, triangles, eyes. We stack stones. We build things in circles and squares, unconsciously echoing forms that feel right in our bones. We assign meaning to numbers. We count time in moons. We bury our dead with care, even before we fully understand what death is. And across thousands of miles, in cultures that never touched, we carve the same shapes. We tell the same stories. We whisper of the same beginnings. It raises a question that science cannot fully answer. Where did these instincts come from? They seem too consistent, too universal to be coincidence. The serpent who guards knowledge, the sacred mountain that touches heaven, the flood that cleanses, and the hero who begins again. The cycle of life, death, and rebirth endlessly repeating, like the seasons, like the stars. These are not the stories of one place or people. They are embedded in the species itself. Sometimes, it feels as if we are haunted by a past we do not remember. Carl Jung called them archetypes, universal, patterns buried deep in the collective unconscious. But perhaps they are more than patterns. Perhaps they are echoes, imprints from a time before time, when the world was different and our minds were shaped not only by biology, but by memory. Not individual memory, but ancestral, civilizational. What if the fascination with sacred geometry is not just mathematical curiosity, but a faint recall of a language once spoken in stone and symbol? The golden ratio, the flower of life, the mandala, all recurring across temples, cathedrals, petroglyphs, and paintings, all reflecting a harmony we feel more than we understand. It's as if these shapes are not decorations, but keys, not art, but instruction. And then there is the sky. Our ancestors were obsessed with it. They aligned monuments to solstices, tracked the wanderings of Venus and Mars, carved lunar calendars into bone long before they could write. Today, we call it astronomy, or sometimes astrology, depending on who's asking. But long ago, it was something deeper, a conversation with the heavens, a mirror perhaps, a reminder. There is something about the stars that calls to us, not with sound, but with silence. A silence that feels like home. Even now, in the modern world, where light blots out most of the night sky, and time is measured not in moons but in minutes, we feel it. That strange ache when we see Saturn through a telescope, that hush when a meteor crosses the dark, that inexplicable pull toward the cosmos, as if part of us remembers falling from it, or being left behind. Rebirth is another thread that ties us together, not just in religion, but in metaphor. The phoenix, the cycle of reincarnation, the wheel of samsara. It shows up in the spiraling galaxies and the growth rings of trees, in the shedding of skin and the turning of tides. Something in us knows that nothing ends. It transforms. It returns. So what was the origin point? What did we live through? What did we lose that echoes so powerfully in dreams and symbols across all cultures and times? If there was a first civilization, as some suggest, perhaps its collapse was not only physical but psychological. A rupture in the human story so great that it was buried, not just by sand and sea, but by time and trauma. And yet, not entirely, because here we are, still drawn to the pyramids, still obsessed with ancient maps, lost cities, forbidden knowledge. We weave these ideas into our books, our films, our games, not just for entertainment, but out of some strange need, a need to remember, a need to reconnect. And maybe that's the most mysterious thing of all, that after language evolved and empires fell, after we split into nations and beliefs, we still carry the same questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? And why does it feel like something is missing? There is no proof that a forgotten civilization shaped the roots of our world, but there are patterns, longings, stories repeated like chants across millennia. And sometimes, the most compelling truths are not found in carbon dating or controlled experiments. They're found in us, in the symbols we carve without knowing why, in the dreams we dream before we learn the words for them, in the feeling that we are not the beginning, but the continuation of something far older. Echoes do not shout. They whisper. But if we listen carefully and look inward as much as outward, we might begin to remember what they are trying to say. If they once were, then we are not the first. And if we are not the first, everything changes. It means that history, as we've been taught, is a sketch, a mosaic with missing tiles, an echo chamber where only certain voices remain loud enough to hear. It means that our origins are not a straight line from cave to city to cloud storage, but a spiral rising, falling, and rising again, shaped by forces as ancient as the earth itself. It means that truth is not a monument, fixed and eternal, but a river. And sometimes rivers disappear underground, only to surface again, transformed. If they once were, then somewhere in the marrow of our species is memory, however fractured. Memory not just of survival, but of mastery. Memory of how to speak to the stars, how to build with stone and resonance, how to live in rhythm with the pulse of the planet, and perhaps even the cosmos beyond. And if all of that lived and then was lost, the question becomes not how, but why. Was it arrogance, a forgetting of limits, a drift away from balance into excess? Or was it something they could not foresee, an ice melt, a comet, a war that didn't end in victory, but in silence? We may never know, but we feel it in our ruins, in our myths, in our questions that refuse to be answered fully, and in our drive to build again, as if somewhere deep inside, we are still trying to remember what was forgotten. There is something humbling in the idea that we are not the peak of the human story, but a chapter in a much older book, and perhaps there is also comfort in it, because it means that collapse is not the end, that light returns, that whatever knowledge was lost is not beyond reach, but waiting, in stone, in code, in us, not to be copied, but rediscovered, reinterpreted, made new. If they once were, it means we walk through the world, surrounded by the remnants of a message written for those who came after, not in language we recognize, but in alignments, in geometry, in echoes of ideas so persistent they travel across time without a name. And perhaps, more than anything, it means that wonder is warranted, that the mystery is not a flaw in the record, but the very key to it. A compass that doesn't point north, but inward. A suggestion that some truths are not told to us. They're shown, scattered, embedded in the planet, and in the stories we carry forward. What do we do with that? We pause. We look again. We ask questions not just with our intellect, but with imagination, with intuition, with the quiet voice that speaks when logic runs dry. Because the greatest discoveries are often not made under microscopes, but under starlight. When we let ourselves wonder without needing an answer. When we consider that maybe, just maybe, truth is not always provable. Sometimes it's perceivable. And if that ancient civilization left clues for us, then we owe them not reverence, but responsibility to listen, to learn, to evolve with more grace than they could, to carry the thread forward, not in worship of the past, but in service to the future. A future that doesn't repeat the same forgetting, but remembers differently, builds differently, dreams differently. Because if they once were, and if they fell, and if we are rising again now, then we are not just inheritors, we are stewards of their wisdom, of their warnings, of this fragile moment we call the present. And maybe, just maybe, we are being watched, not by aliens or gods, but by time itself, waiting to see if we will write the next chapter with the same blind ambition or with eyes wide open. The stars are still there, the stones still whisper, and beneath the layers of noise and certainty, the question still burns quietly. If they once were, what now? That's for us to decide.